Well, today on the Greater Things podcast, I'm with a brand new friend that I've known about for a long time and recently been put in connection with. His name is Chris Falson. He is a singer, songwriter, producer. He has done many, many things. And if you have a look at his website, which I will link to this podcast, you will see all the very things that he has done, been a part of, and doing. But to me, he is a guy who wrote albums back in the 90s that actually shifted my spirit. It changed the way that I interacted with God. One song in particular called Throne Room was one that changed my world forever and allowed me to connect with God from a presence point of view. To this very day, I can still hear the song in my head, mate, and I just want to say thank you for all of that, but that song in particular.
A pleasure. I wondered who liked that song. There you go. This I found someone. Just kidding.
Well, back when I was much younger and I was looking for music to worship to, and you did the brilliant thing of putting your music online where we could actually download a copy of it and play it. And because I have to have a piece of paper in front of me to play music and all that sort of stuff, this was like a gift from heaven that I could put to memory the song of Throne Room, mate. So thank you.
Yeah. Wow. My pleasure. Yeah.
Anyway, this conversation, or all of the conversations I have with this podcast, start with a place of who is the guest that I'm sitting with. So, Chris, I know that I've already given you that thought bubble, but everything past that is something we get to be creative and to think around. And we've already, before we started recording, talked a lot about creativity, and I'm really excited to have the listeners hearing what's going on inside your spirit. But do you mind just starting off with who is Chris Folson?
Yeah. Okay. This great question is like I hate boxes.
Mm,
So and I say, who am I? I am. I am. I am. I make the joke. Therefore I am. But um, I'm a storyteller. I think of anything else. That's why I am a storyteller. I wake up in the morning with a story in my head or a song idea or some solution to something I'm doing. I think of that's how I think of myself, and that and the output of a song or a story or a lesson or a concert or something that's just coming out of the storyteller person. And to think about how God, I was raised as an atheist, and there's some real positive aspects about that. And you're a pastor's kid, so you're the exact opposite. Years ago, I became friends with Rodney Howard Brown, and we were comparing notes in our lives were nothing like each other. And so he was raised, a little kid in church, maybe like you were. And, his parents were preaching at camp meetings and he's asleep on the thing. And I said, oh, yeah, I was asleep in the bar when my parents were playing in the clubs. It's a slight exaggeration, but
mm,
it's not unlike that in a sense. So being raised by entertainers, both my parents were entertainers, my grandparents on my mother's side were entertainers. And what was normal, that's the thing about what was normal as a kid. And I remember going to school, age 6 or something. The school was across the road. I lived in San Susie back then on the south side.
mm,
And the teacher comes around and asks everybody what their dad did. It's the world has changed, right? They wouldn't do that now.
mm.
But my dad's a builder, my dad's a fireman, and my dad's a whatever, and my dad's a musician, I said, and no one knew what that was. And then one kid thought I said magician, and they got very excited that my father was a magician. And then the teacher had to pour, water on that and said, no, he's a musician. Explain what that was. And it was like, oh, how boring, how dull. I grew up in this way that everybody that visited my house for a long time, I mean, my father would be writing music. He worked on the TV shows back then, which was, I mean, the Today Show or the whatever,
Mm,
Ray Martin or Mike Walsh or whatever.
mm.
And so people like Little Paddy or Johnny Farnham or Don Lane or these people at their house all the time, my father.
Wow.
So that was kind of a normal thing. So in a funny way, without ever being told it, just by being inside it, I was given permission and to be a creative person. And so that's kind of, I think, where I was. And then the atheist thing is interesting to me about because my grandfather was an atheist also, but he was the one that encouraged me and my brother and sister to ask questions all the time,
Mm,
which got us in a lot of trouble. It got me caned at school an awful lot and asking questions. But that's, I think, that we talked before about the wisdom or searching for wisdom is that I think those two areas, my parents being entertainers, and just seeing my father write music. So he wrote scores. He would actually sit down and just like the movie Amadeus with Mozart would hear the tune. So I was taught to do that as well, to write
Wow.
without your guitar or your piano next to you. And I still
Mm,
do that. I've got a melody, da 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 da, I write it out, by habit. And so that's that side. And then my grandfather's side, which is the seeking of wisdom, was actually how I got saved because I was walking up and down. I'd walk to the football. I love walking and dreaming. I still do. That's also a spectrum thing. So
mhm,
I don't like being with people. I like talk to myself. So I'd walk for hours, and then I started noticing nature in with a different perspective.
mm,
And because I was taught to ask questions, I started asking questions. Hang on a second. Touching leaves and touching trees, the bark on the gum tree or the bottle brush or something. And I started thinking, somebody did this. Somebody
mm,
made that. It's the starting of journey. So I think that's what I am. I'm a storyteller and I'm a seeker.
mm,
And everything that comes out of me, it comes out of this inquisitive thing. And a big push for creativity. We talked before about the kingdom of God is that um, I recently did I'm writing this book on creativity, maybe if I
mm,
finish it. Um, but in the research going online, I found this study by NASA. I'm knowing
mm,
I'm going off, but I'll come back to Earth in a minute. But in 1960s, the Russians beat the Americans to up, had
mm,
Sputnik. They panicked. NASA panicked, and they said, "Well, we've got to have a long game here. We need to find more creative geniuses."
mm,
So they had this study, and they did this thing with kids. They said, let's start with children. So between 3 and 5, they measured the creativity of 1,600 children of all different backgrounds, color, and everything. They found out that 98% of those kids had the potential to be a creative genius.
wow.
But by the time they were 18, only 2%.
Wow.
They came down towards, but and curiosity was knocked out of them through
Yeah.
school. They were encouraged to pass tests.
Mm,
And churches are worse, probably, in this way.
mm,
Listen to the Bible says this, and da 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 da, and I'm
mm,
preaching, and you should listen, and you should thank me afterwards, kind of thing. And Jesus was the exact opposite. He told stories that no one understood around him, and he knew that, and he loved doing it, which I must admit, I like that part of it,
mm,
coming up with something that maybe not everybody understands. So that's, if that makes sense, it's a complicated way, but that's how I view myself. I don't think of myself as a guitar player or a musician or a songwriter. I am all those things. I'm really a storyteller and a seeker.
mm,
And remember the song, the U2 song came out, and at the time I didn't understand it. Again, it's a bit like a parable. I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
mm,
And at the time, I'm thinking, well, what do you mean? I was leading worship in a church, and surely they have found it. And then
mm,
I can really, relate to that now. I'm
yeah.
always looking, and if we can put God, even in the Bible, if we can put him in the Bible, he's not a very big God.
Yeah.
He's extremely mysterious, and I love the fact that he's mysterious, and that gives me, I can be mysterious too. People don't have to
Mm,
understand. So yeah, that's the joy. And I think working here in LA for 32 years now, this week, I think it is. And got to work on lots of different little films and TV shows. And all the people on those people, they're storytellers. And that's what's cherished. Hollywood has a lot of other things, but the actual making of things is for storytellers.
mm,
And if the church could understand that and be storytellers, they would reach way more people, and more people would understand or be drawn to the mystery in God's love. But they don't. They like telling people what to do, which is what
mm,
they were taught in school and college. And I think sometimes, are we reading the same book? Because the four Gospels is basically a storyteller confusing the people around him, hoping they seek.
yeah.
So there you go. There's my long-winded answer about who I am.
There's so much in that, mate, that I want to get curious around myself. Like, I was talking with a primary school teacher a few weeks ago, and she said the problem with education in Australia is that we teach kids what to learn, not how to learn.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, that's not just school, that's also church. So the what becomes more important than the how or the why. And the curiosity for me of the kingdom is not in, like C.S. Lewis once said, if one person can actually articulate everything of God, then I could be God myself sort of thing. That was a very butchered version of C.S. Lewis's brilliant
I
quote there.
know. I did.
But
Yeah.
these are the sorts of concepts for me that, like that, you know how the Bible says that all things new? Well, even those phrases around the idea of kids being 98% creative genius, like look at the kids that we have today. When they're young, the fear of failure is not there. By the time they get to 18, they're going, is it good enough? Now, what would it look like if we let go of that phrase and allowed them to be the creative, like you say, the geniuses they are in all the areas that they want to be creative in? And like we said before we got on record, the idea of creator and creative, these things are intricately, whatever that word is, linked.
Yeah.
For me, it's a non-negotiable, but I've found over time in church, it's been separated rather than embraced or rejoiced over.
Yeah, we have to, I think, our role, each of us, anybody watching this or listening, whatever, that's our role is to make the change. And instead of, I mean, like I said, I carried a bit of a bitterness or anger about the church. And I started starting churches outside the mainstream. I've started in pubs in here and twice, and then Switzerland and New Zealand and different places. And it's only really to reach people who wouldn't come to normal things. But when you do that, you actually have to come up with a whole new blueprint because there's a pub and there's a bar at the back and people could smoke. And then, okay, that changes. What church does that?
Mm,
But there's a fun thing about the journey. I think when we're always doing, oh, I've got a sort of joke on this, is that if every church service starts the same way, I think how many churches there are in Australia, I don't know, but there's 300 something thousand here in the US.
mm,
And pretty much 99% of them, they start with a fast song, the second song, they have the announcements. You could actually kind of roadmap. And
mm,
there's nothing creative about that.
yeah.
A creative thing would be like, I don't know, what are we going to do this week? How are we going to do it? And
Mm,
and so I live in that kind of world and I enjoy that kind of thing. I on ChatGPT, I use it for research all the time, but also tease it. So I
mm,
try to get it saved. I shared my testimony with ChatGPT, and
mm.
it came back and says, "Oh, what a well, I can't think. What is it? Very romantic view of life." It basically sort of said to
Oh,
me.
wow.
But I continue. I still try to preach to it. But the notion of creativity. So I asked ChatGPT. I said, I'm trying to think of a term for a creative team in a church. It could be anywhere, but church is my market. That is doing the same thing every week. So it's not being creative. What would you call that? And it came back with 10. But the best one was the copy paste collective.
Oh, wow.
Brutal, right?
Yeah.
But actually, kind of how it is. And so, even like with you, like with your books, I've not read them, right? But I've just had a quick look at them. And I started writing this book on creativity, and I'm halfway through it, and I'm having lunch with two authors,
Mm,
right? This is a few months ago. And I'm telling about this book and the Nash, and they go, oh, wow, wow, wow. And I said, what would be the best way to communicate this? And as I say it, I go, oh, I know what the answer is. I
mm,
hate the answer. The answer is to tell stories.
yeah.
And they said, yeah, tell stories. I go, yeah, that's a lot of work. And then that's the problem. It's a lot easier to write a how-to book
Mm,
and we give them things, but then to actually tell the stories, which like a parable. And I
yeah.
think so for my responsibility, I'm looking at the next season of songwriting and projects is storytelling way to communicate what we're talking about and it'll reach who it reaches. But the deaf ears are already on say, the bigger mega church pastors. They're already deaf to this anyway because they think, well, wouldn't listen to me anyway,
Mm,
unless you have a big church.
yeah.
So they're missing the point. So I don't see them as my target audience. And the bell curve's a great example because let's say this Netflix and Amazon and Apple are here,
Mm,
and the interesting things are done down here, all the innovations, and it's also with
mm,
people. And so, like young parents of young families, which would be great on this, right?
yeah.
Their target market of this conversation. And if they go, oh, yeah, if your kids are 3 to 5 or 6, maybe,
Mm,
you've got a chance to help them become a creative genius. Now, if they get older, you still can. You can still go back. You can backpedal.
mm,
But what they could do if they turn 18 or 20 and they could be a creative genius, then we could change the world. And so
mm,
that's kind of this is my latest mission. Can
Yeah.
I do that? It just starts with us. We start,
Mm,
and then my wife, my kids, whatever. Like my
yeah.
younger son James, I'm a grandchild now, so he he really bought into this idea. So he's been before she was born. She's just turned 2, but before she was born, he would play Steely Dan, Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky, Beethoven into the tummy.
Yeah.
And every day in the house, he plays all these different things to
Mm,
educate her brain. 'Cause that's part of the study that NASA did. The more art and the more music and the more stories you can, even if they don't know what it is.
mm.
So anyway, so I've got one disciple. He's gone.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because our youngest son, he actually is a drummer for one of the churches over here at the moment, and it's always been his dream to do that. And when he was in the womb, my wife would play music to him, and there was one moment where she said, you can feel Zach keeping beat to the rhythm even inside the womb." And now he's just turned 26, and he's drumming his heart out. He's actually a sound engineer as well, and doing and living the best life in in that sort of regard. Mate, I love the idea of storyteller. Like, as you've seen with my books, the books 2, 3, and 4 are all parable, written on major stories of the Old Testament. And the idea simply happened on a walk that my wife and I were on around our suburb. On my first book, I said to Trish, I said, you know what, I reckon I need a parable. And she's like, why? Like, what for? And I said, I don't know, but I think Jesus taught this way. And I think it's really cool how I can read like a parable of the sower, and I can get different things from it every single time that I read it. I wonder if I could write this way. And so much of the books that I've written so far in parable form, the younger generation, so teenagers and down, are engaging with the concept of the creativity. And for this old guy, it's brilliant to see young kids picking up that and just going, I want to be creative.
Yeah, no, I actually do have a collection of stories. I started doing the same thing. So I teach at a few little conferences, and I said one day, when Jesus told the parables, I said he made that stuff up, and I got a breath. They went, oh, you know, I said, well, hang on, let's think about it. I went through each parable, where did that come from? Show me in the Old Testament where that is. And so it's an opening of that's also a thought process most people don't ever think of. So
Mm,
I started writing, same as you, but I've got a book. Maybe I've got to go through it, but it's called the working title: Short Stories, tall
mm,
stories, short tales, or something like that. Tall tales, short
mhm.
stories, because half of them are true and half of them are not true.
Yeah.
But the ones that are the true ones are crazier than the non-true ones. Because of
Mm,
we've played in Europe where I had this whole notion to take a worship band per se out into
mm,
the clubs and just tour. So I did that for years in America and US and Europe, and with stories and stories and stories, the things that happened in there are such amazing. So when I've told them, especially like a non-charismatic church person, I tell them, they go, "Oh, that could never happen." So if I put them in a book and say, "This could have happened or it couldn't happen," you decide. It's
mm,
easier. But yeah, I think stories are great. I mean, um, I'm working on a film. I'm working as part of a team on a film right now, and the story behind the background of that is so amazing. I hope it comes out because it's in the funding stage.
mm,
But that's the sort of thing as you go, yeah, because it's a story of brokenness and how do we do that? And
mm,
I think, maybe from a bullhorn kind of way, is to stir up anybody out there who's a storyteller or anybody who's got a story. Think of a way how you could share that story or how you could do it. Could be a song, could be a book, could be a painting, could be whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be anything that the world, as in the whole world, sees. It might just be your neighbor. That might be
mm,
it. Might just be for
mm.
you.
Yeah.
I started painting for fun, and I don't care if I get better or not. If you go on my Bandcamp site, I've done 3 or 4, titles, pages of my covers of my songs,
Mm,
and it's meant to be like a child. I like that they're
yeah.
like a child. So, but yeah, that's that encouraging of other people, but giving people permission to have fun with art.
Mm, yeah. Wasn't it Picasso who said, I spent my entire life learning to paint like a master than the rest of my life to paint like a child.
Yeah, he says paint like Reuben. He said, I spent 20 years trying to paint like Reuben and the rest of my life painting like a child. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's someone I think that I never understood him as a young person. I probably into my late 20s. I think, oh, that's crap. I'd say that's crap.
Mm,
And then I went to an art gallery and it was all that impressionists and everything. And I was determined to understand him. And at the end, wow, I really loved it. And I saw one painting. I forget what it's called, but it's this strange, angry lady on the beach. And I go, oh, I know her. It's like a narcissist kind of character. And so, yeah, I fell in love with that kind of art that is hard to explain.
mm,
And I like songs that can't explain them. Or I love actually, or don't actually love it, but I get a lot of people write to me and tell me what my song's about, and it's like, wow, I never thought of that. Thank you.
I always struggled in school where they said, "What did Shakespeare really mean by this?" And I'm thinking, did Shakespeare actually put all of this into his writing?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, it's a thing of yeah, trying to make things. That's the thing of art, good art. Yeah.
Mm,
Well, my mother was an actress, and she would say to me like about theater. She would drag me to the theater as a kid every weekend. I hated it until I was about 14. So I
mm,
went from the age of 8 every weekend, every second weekend. Oh no, dragged along because I was child minding kind of thing. And I'd say, oh, this is terrible. I don't understand. It's so stupid. And then one day, whatever, I forget what the play was, but I'm in the back of the car and she's with another actress. And I started saying, oh, that play was so stupid. I don't get. And I started telling what I didn't get.
mm,
And the other actress said to my mother, I think he's getting it.
mm,
And she said to me, yeah, if you understand, play a theater, a good art should make you think. It shouldn't give you answers.
mm,
It should actually put questions in your head,
mm.
which is again like Jesus. He asked these parables, told the parables, and nobody understood it.
Yeah.
We have the hindsight of 2,000 years later to go, oh yeah, we know what that means.
Mm,
But yeah, I think that's the fun. I think little kids, that the mystery of children. I work hard. I guess I work hard, and when I'm coaching, I try to make people to think like a child.
yeah.
Child has fun. Doesn't care
Mm,
about results or winning
mm,
necessarily. Most kids. And when we're jamming in the studio, if I like the really, really good musicians, and I get to play with amazing ones here, but the really, really good ones know how to get there real quickly.
mm,
The mystery of the song, finding it.
yeah.
They're not worried about it. It's a funny thing. Often the best and most famous musicians in the studio aren't playing anything clever.
Mm,
So I hear this music come out of people from college, from Berkeley and stuff, and a lot of these modern jazz things come out. Everything's fast. It's like, yeah,
mm,
go in the studio with really good. They never do that.
mm.
Or it's
Wow.
just maybe at the end of something we've got there. It's all about creating an atmosphere together or something beautiful. And anyway, so yeah,
Yeah. When even when I am teaching, like the moment I'm doing a course on dream interpretation, helping people get involved with their dreams. And one of the phrases I start with, if we make this more complicated than a child can understand, we're too
yeah.
complicated. And so I really resonate that. Mate, if someone comes to you and says, I want to write a song or I want to write a book, but who's going to listen to it? How do you respond to that phrase?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And a lot of people have that in them. I'm
Mm,
actually doing some little one-off little courses. One is of course, we wrong. I'm going to put them on YouTube for free, but they're like creative block, right? And one
mm,
of the thing is the fear of that, like waste of time. Why should I do it? Or the parents, or I never had that. So I never had a parent say to me, you
mm,
don't do that. It's a waste of your life. But many people do. Well, the thing about it is, so I mean, there's a guy, famous songwriter. I'll think of his name in a minute, but he said, "Oh, the world doesn't need another love song. We've got plenty of those love songs. But what the world needs is your love song. It
yeah.
needs your story or your way of singing it. And we could all, like I say, 20 people see a car accident, and none of us saw the same car accident. So that's how that first thing I'd say. I actually do need, I need you, Matt.
Mm,
Like if you're going to write a book, I need your story of what's
mm,
going on in the world right now, and you'll see it differently. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is you're taking yourself way too seriously if you think, why
Mm.
should I write that? A lot of people come to me, they say they want to be something. Maybe you're the same. I want to be a songwriter, but it's a romantic view.
Yeah.
If you're a songwriter, you're thinking of songs. You're
Mm.
waking up the morning, you've got a song. You don't, you may have self-esteem issues, or you might have that question, but you've got things in your head. And so I'm always encouraging people to gravitate to the thing that's natural. So, if I throw a ball at someone and they catch it with their left hand, that's a good sign they're left-handed, right? And
Mm.
so there's things like that. How do we do that? So that's why I encourage people. But there's also people who like one guy came to me 5 years ago, and you would say he was tone deaf if you heard
Mm.
him, if you're standing next to him in church, tone deaf, and he sent me some lyrics, and they were pretty bad, And so he
Mm.
said, "Can you help me write songs?" And part of me was like, "Do I really want to do this? Are you wasting your time?" And he said, "I'll pay you." I was like, "Oh, well, you pay me? Okay, great." But what I learnt with him, and it changed the way I teach a lot of people, is that I helped him find in him this little vein of creativity
Mm.
and the conversation. And the big hurdle for him was, yes, he to tell his story without trying to be a writer, because that's
Yeah.
where people get it wrong. They try to be clever and they're just
Mm.
messing it up. So it's the natural flow. Um, so that's how I would say it. That's the quickest thing is like have fun. The world definitely needs, everybody's view on a song or something, especially when it comes from here, not
Yeah.
from here. It comes
Yeah.
from the soul, it comes from your heart.
Mm.
I like right now, we're in all around the world. You just had an election, and we've got the whole world's in turmoil, and there's left and right, and there's pro this and pro that or whatever.
Mm.
And as an artist, I feel my job here is to help people find the soul of the situation, not the black and whiteness of it. Because and also I think probably, I mean, every artist is different. There'll be artists who are good at protesting, like Dylan. He created change or helped
Mm.
create change with songs. For me, I'm a peacemaker, even though
Mm.
I might have an opinion about some thing that's going on in politics, whatever. But I got to be careful because it's just an opinion, and it's
Mm.
just from the head. But my soul and my heart are much better at writing songs about
Mm.
the brokenness or the throne room, let's say, or whatever.
Mm.
So that's something I work at. And if I'm coaching or encouraging a room full of creatives, I'll point that at as well. If you
Mm.
unless you're on the earth to shake your fist at injustice, your
Mm.
job also is to do the same thing in some fashion. So
Mm. Yeah. I love that answer. The idea behind your voice, I think, is a very unique conversation, which again, I don't think churches have done that brilliantly well because normally it's usually one person telling people who they are or what they are. But the voice inside of a person, it's one of the things I'm really passionate about is releasing it or listening to the story that flows from the depth of the voice. And now, when I wrote my first book, I was sort of giving it away to friends to say, "Can you read this and just help me if I?" And like all this concepts and feedback were coming back, but there was a challenge inside of it to lose my voice, to
yeah,
sound like other Christian writers or to sound like other writers. And I knew at the time, but I didn't understand it, was there's a warring within me as to why do I want to change? And some things needed to be changed because, hey, English was not my strong suit. But inside of it, my voice was starting to form. Now I've got 4 books under my belt. I feel like I'm just beginning to properly understand the idea of my voice. And I know I've got a long way to go, but this one revelation of discovering your own voice, I think it's one of those, it's like if you use a biblical term, it's like a key of the kingdom for your own world to discover more of who you are. Would you agree with that statement?
yeah. Well, I think from the day when you get to kindergarten, I think it's kindergarten, or maybe no, it's preschool.
Mm.
Before you get to preschool, you actually had a better understanding of we all did, of who we are,
Mm.
how we thought. We sort of were okay because before preschool, we didn't have to pass a test.
Yeah, that's good.
Everything was about, oh, let's paint, let's think, let's imagine a funny story, and people might be more shy than the next person, but we're encouraged. As soon as you get to preschool, now we have to pass tests.
Yeah.
So we're on a journey to unlearn who we are. We have to conform.
Mm.
And so that's a terrible, terrible system. I
Mm.
remember my son, young James, he was probably 10 or something, maybe younger. I took him to the golf range. It was my turn to mind James Saturday afternoon to get on the golf range. And he'd never played golf before. But he
Mm.
got some clubs, it's the right thing. And he started swinging them, and he's knocking them straight down the middle. And it's interesting that I had a guy that was a teacher, he noticed it, and he said, "Yeah,"
Mm.
he said, "you can tell someone who's never had lessons because they actually have the more natural swing than the guys that had all the lessons and all the because you
Wow.
get all the fingers in your arm, and a
Mm.
kid just naturally swings." And I think that's a big issue. I took me finding my voice. I found my voice as a musician first, but I probably would have been 30 or 31. I already
Mm.
left school, like my teens. I worked as a musician for 10 or 12 years.
Mm.
My job when I played as a sideman, for Little Paddy or Johnny Farnham and whatever it was back in those days, you'd go to a club somewhere or a TV show and you'd have a chart, a music chart. And
Mm.
as a guitar player, it'd always say, it'd give you the tempo, the key, and then on the left-hand corner, it would say, a la, play like
Mm.
B.B. King, play like Eric Clapton, play like
Okay.
Freddie Green. And you had to know all these guitar players, Django Reinhardt, yeah, whatever. So it might be country, might be jazz, whatever. And so there's sort of you get rewarded by being someone else,
Mm.
and you get pat on the back. Oh, that's awesome! You play just like the church right now is probably the worst of it because of all the tracks and all the four or
Mm.
five big worship teams everybody's copying. And
Mm.
someone says, "Wow, you sound just like Jesus culture." Wow, whatever.
Mhm.
Oh, that's you go, wow, thank you. And I don't see that as a biblical thing at all. But so for me, what happened was, um, about 30 or 31, I got a job, part-time job as a music director at a church, Christian City Church in Brookvale near Manly. And then they offered me a full-time job, which was very strange. I didn't I'd never had no ambitions to do this, but the full-time job was quite demanding. We ended up being 60 hours a week. I had no time for anything else. So and
Mm.
my wife and I both felt like, we definitely had a checkered time in our early 20s making some bad decisions.
Mm.
Like, let's do this. They've offered this thing to us. Okay, let's commit. So I stopped all the other gigs. And for about 2 years, what was happening to me was I had that little bubble, and I
Mm.
started shaping the musicians. You guys would get saved. I'd bring. And I had a sound in my head, and something was happening there. And then I got a call one day from Little Patty, and she said, "Hey, my guitar player's sick. Can you?" She said to me a funny thing. She said, "I know you're doing that church thing." She said, "But any chance you could play on Friday night?" And I was like, "Yeah, thought that'd be yeah, cool." So I turned up, and Laurie Thompson, her husband, was playing drums. I don't remember who the other guys were,
Mm.
but Little Patty's songs, if you don't know, if people aren't listening, if you're a different age, it's just country rock, and it's real simple and it's fun for a guitar player,
Mm.
especially. So I'm ripping through all these songs, they're reading the charts and having fun. And at the end of the night, and also I didn't take any pedals. I'm like, for a guitar player, if you know, I had a racks, but I didn't take any because I'd stopped using them. I just had just a Telecaster and an amp. Anyway, at the end of the night, Laurie Thompson came over to me and said, sort of asked me what the heck I've been doing because I
Mhm.
disappeared out of their life for 2 years.
Mm.
And he said, "Man, I've never heard you play like that before." He says, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And I drove home and I started thinking like, oh, I didn't take pedals. Oh my God, I didn't do this and the other thing. It's like I didn't look at the play like so and so. I just ignored that.
Mm.
And I realized that I started to had begun to discover who I was as a musician. So that's the first thing that happened to me. And I share this many times around the world that I discovered who I was in worship, which is significant,
Mm.
right? In God's presence, I forgot who I was supposed to be and I became who
Yeah.
I really was. And on the guitar side, and then the songwriting thing kind of followed, was that so no one's totally unique. So I was in the sense that I grew up listening to James Taylor and Eric Clapton and all these different
Mm.
things, and so they're part of you. Like just all the books you've read, C.S. Lewis or whatever it may be, that's part of who you are. But then you interpret it somehow. So um, the songwriting thing aspect, I just worked out who I was, and I'm not a populist in that sense. I'm not
Mm.
naturally drawn to writing a hit song. I've had songs that have been successful, but I'm not drawn to it. And I just had to learn that that's, I don't know if, I'm not sure if anybody is either actually, but I was never excited by that.
Mm.
And so the writing of a book or writing, if I was going to write a book now, the challenge I have, I think I've got these story ideas is that some of them are would be very challenging to most church people. And I wonder, maybe I need a pseudonym to write those ones. I don't
Mm.
know. But yeah, who your voice is and like,
Mm.
okay, who's your favorite authors in life?
Yeah,
Who are they?
yeah, that's a great question. Like, because I'm hugely influenced by C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. Gene Edwards is another one. I don't know if you've heard of Gene Edwards, but he writes parable. He's now he's now passed on, but he wrote a book called A Tale of Three Kings, which actually um,
Oh,
it changed the way that I looked at writing. And I thought, you know what? I love this, the allegory. I love it. And so these are the sorts of people for me that drew deeper conversations. And so then I'm reading a book at the moment by a guy called Brendan Sanderson. He's all big fantasy. And for me, it's the concept of the story. Like, tell it in the way you feel it, tell it in the way that you experience it, tell it in the way you smell it, the way you taste it. And again, for this little guy who could not pass English at school, it's
I didn't
all of
pass it
us.
either. So
But
I
it's
failed
all of
English.
these things now that I'm drawing in, but it's helping me find my voice in a way that I can. I think also I'd love to hear what you think about this because it's valuing your own story as well. Because sometimes we don't value our story. We listen to someone else's. And in churches, how many times have we gone on Nicky Cruz or whoever it is? We've gone, they've got a bigger story than I do. But we lessen the value of our own.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's the same with Nicky Cruz. I remember hearing his thing. It's like, why do I ever share anything? You can't, it's like it's all done. Yeah, I think also, but back on like the fantasy thing is interesting. I'm actually being drawn to that. Uh, yeah, I can't think of the authors. I just, my brain's not good on that. But part of the reason to be drawn to those things or the way of telling a story is I think it can be the style of writer. Okay, in songwriting, the best way of explaining it. Style and genre aren't the same.
Mm,
Okay, so the genre of C.S. Lewis and Narnia, those things, and Tolkien, that's a much more of a genre, a genre, so as a fantasy thing. But the voice of the writer, I think that's different because in songwriting and publishing terms, you could have a rock song, which is a genre,
mm,
but it could be a story or a love
yeah.
song or
Mm,
inspirational, which is a
mm,
style. And I think so. I'm being challenge or thinking through writing some fantasy things because of the interest in the audience and the younger people what they're into. So I
mm,
think if I was trying to reach younger people now and to encourage them with identity, because that's I think that's the thread that goes through most of my music and stuff
yeah.
is that I would probably be writing fantasy-ish type stories and novels, but the voice would be the same because
Yeah.
I'm a conversationalist. That's the thing I learned in songwriting, and the same when I write
Mm,
stories. Like I get like I love Tolkien, and I've read 3 times, whatever. But I find myself in the partly it's the spectrum thing. If someone's got like a whole page of action, I go, I can get it. My
mm,
brain, my imagination is better than your writing. Sorry, buddy. I mean, Tolkien's probably not one I do it too often, but when people's too much description about the tree and the roots and
mm,
stuff, yeah, yeah, I got it.
mm,
And so because I'm drawn to, I need story, but I need the reaction of the person. That's how
yeah.
I write. So I'm
Mm,
drawn to that. So my favorite authors is a 20-year-old was Graham Greene, was the
mhm,
British writer, Evelyn
okay.
Waugh. They all write short books,
Mm,
all 130, 140 pages long.
mm,
Brighton Rock, I think that might be 200 pages, but or Hemingway,
mm,
Man at Sea, is that right? Is
yeah.
that the right title? But it's a short book, and
Mm,
so I'm drawing as a songwriter. Songwriter is about getting a lot of information into
mm,
3 minutes, which
yeah.
means my style is I believe you're a smart person who's listening to it. I tell you every detail. I
Mm,
chop and move it through like a good editor. So that's how I learned. And then when I'm writing, when I'm starting to write short stories, I'm very aware of that. Keep it
mm,
short, keep it, because that's my style. And
mm,
but yeah, I think that's really important. The conversations too about other people is helping them. How do you find their style? The only, well, you have to keep writing. You have to keep doing
mm,
it, but without fear. That's the thing when I'm teaching is like, so if you're afraid that someone won't like it,
mm,
like they flew me to Nashville to produce or to work with a pretty famous Christian band, and the record company says you've got to get them thinking differently. The song's all the same. Okay, so I just sit down, have a conversation like this,
mm,
and I get them talking about some things they'd gone through. And I
mm,
went, oh man, that's a great idea for a song. So we started working on it, and then and
mm,
all of a sudden they go, oh my God, I could never, if my pastor ever heard me say this. And I thought,
mm,
oh God,
mm. Yeah.
you're afraid. You're afraid of being honest or being transparent.
Mm, yeah.
So I think that's a huge issue. But so my job partly is to be very transparent. And
Mm,
as my wife says, I wrote a song last week. She said, oh, there's another song you get in trouble for. I was like, yeah, probably. Because it's just being transparent and honest
mm,
about your life, or you're showing, here's my heart, here's my thing. Because
yeah.
in Christian world, that's the church is so afraid of sharing,
Mm,
like David running down with his underpants on in the story,
mm,
or David's sin and Bathsheba and he kills her
mm,
husband. It, it, See, somebody left that in the book because it's good for us.
yeah.
But I think the modern church would take three-quarters of the Bible and cut it out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bit. Oh, we shouldn't have the Bathsheba story. Oh no. Oh no, we
Mm,
can't have a prostitute in the lineage of Jesus, or
yeah.
whatever. It's like, oh my God, let's cut that out. Let's cut it out. So it's the interesting thing about art, and that's where
Mhm.
I've mostly honestly work either outside the church or helping people aim outside the church. It's more
Yeah.
fun.
I think I'd love to do another podcast with you on authenticity and being seen. I just
Lie.
think,
Just lie to you. No, I'm kidding.
but these are the topics, like you say, the church is often scared to go near because they wonder what happens next. And that's a
Yeah,
fear
yeah,
conversation, but it could be an absolute love conversation where I wonder where this thing goes next. And this is some of the conversations I want to be in with
yeah.
people, Chris.
That's it. I think you have to be, or the person at the end, like the church in Avalon, they
Mm,
they were broken, so they're being rebuilt. The
mm,
church and the leaders, so they're totally into this conversation.
mm,
Yeah, and I don't think you can, um, like also, the more successful you are, the more pressure it is to maintain success.
mm.
So
Yeah,
I loved the Bob Dylan
yeah.
journey when he went electric, and
Mm,
his fans hated him, and he didn't care.
mm,
Or when U2 went dance, Achtung Baby comes out and it's all this dance
mm,
beats in there, and they had the same things like, oh, it's exciting, it's fun. Well, I've had that many, many times, and I have problems with people when I don't. I would say half, oh no, three-quarters of the songs I write don't have the word Jesus in it. But if you got any brains, you'll work out that's what I'm talking about. But I get hate mail all the time on
wow.
social media from
Mm,
Christians
yeah.
telling me, just sing about Jesus, man. Sing. I said, well, the funny thing is because I was in a studio with a pretty well-known engineer here, and he wanted to bless me. I'd helped him. So bring your guitar out and let's record 20 or 30 really good demos. I said, great.
Mm,
I came around and I got to him about the 15th song, and he says to me, like just stops and goes, hey, listen, no, you sing about God. Even when you're not singing about God, I can tell you're singing about God. You'd be so much more successful if you didn't do that. And I started looking through some of the songs I had, because at that time I was getting lots of songs licensed on TV shows.
mm,
I go, well, that song Unconditional Love, that was on CSI, and that song there was on Brothers, and I went through all the things. And he said to me, oh, sorry, don't listen to me then. Keep doing what you're doing. But so funny thing is he's a seeker. Not at that time he was a non-Christian. He was a
mm,
seeker, and all he could hear in my songs was God. And the Christian, right-wing, crazy, let's say, or
mm,
fundamentalist Christian, complaining, I can't hear God because they only hear God if I say Jesus or the
mm,
cross or the blood or the lamb.
mm,
They're cliches after a while, unfortunately, if not done rightly. So that's the thing. So when you are honest or transparent, you're going to win somebody and touch somebody, and you're going to offend a lot of
mm,
other people. And Jesus
mm,
did. He offended all the religious people and he ended up dying for it. So I think if I'm not offending someone without swearing, without
mm.
doing something, awful, then I'm not doing a good job.
Yeah.
I have to be offending just because truth offends, truth challenges.
Mm,
So I think it'd be great to have workshops, not a conference so much, but workshops,
mm.
but with leaders or people that genuinely want to reach the
Yeah.
non-church people about this subject, because I would like to think there'd be other people who are doing it who can share their story and go, oh, because when I share the starting the church in the bar thing,
Mm,
I was in Singapore just like 3 weeks ago, and it was, a different time. I wasn't really meeting, in my mind, my people so much. I was helping and coaching, but until the last day, and I met this pastor, and I started sharing him this, and the light bulb. He goes, I always want to do that. How do you do that? And
mm,
I was catching a plane only hours later, and I said, I can start writing to you, but um, why don't I come back? And I'm going to go back there in a few months, maybe. I said, we'll do a pop-up event and I'll show you how
mm,
you do it. It's not
yeah,
rocket science, but
mm,
it's nothing like normal church.
mm,
So, you have to have people with the stories. And there are people out there all around the world who are doing these great grassroots things. Um, but I don't, maybe like revolutions
mm,
don't really start in the center of
mm.
town, do they?
They don't.
They somewhere else. And
Yeah. At tables is where they start.
yeah.
Yeah. I heard you use a line the other day, mate, which said if it's not rocket science, if it was, rocket scientists would be making songs or writing
There you
songs.
go. You watched my video, yeah. Yeah, no, it's not rocket science at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mate, I'm going to put a bit of a pause in this conversation. If not, I'll be breaking records for how long my podcasts go for. But
Right. That works.
I'd love to be able to do another one with you at some point. But when I was introduced to you by your nephew as the wisest man he knows, and I just want to say thanks for letting me sit amongst your wisdom. Before we went live, I called you a bard, and I'm very
I've been called worse.
Yep, very true. But it's the storyteller bringing old truths back to life in ways that people are engaging in creativity, mate. So I just want to say thank you. So, for everyone listening, this is the Greater Things podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll be back in your ears next time. Bye for now.